Hello, hello. My name is Jennifer, and this is Jen the Bookworm, and thank you for coming and visiting my channel. If you are here for the first time, welcome, and if you are a repeat offender, I appreciate you very much for coming back. Today, I'm going to do kind of a condensed version of a video I've been seeing going around and around, a couple videos actually. The best books of 2022 and the worst books of 2022. And now, these are not the best books objectively or the worst books objectively. These are the books that I had the best time reading and the books that I had the worst time reading of 2022. Now, 2022 is not over, and I just finished reading Mistborn Era 1, The Final Empire, which, if that book is anything to go by, I still have some really good books in 2022 to read, and that could have very well ended up on this list. But I kind of feel like it's I've read most of what I'm going to read. I have a couple of books that very well could end up on a best of list, but I also feel like I don't have I'm not as well read as many of the people who are circulating these kinds of videos. So I don't feel like I have a bunch of books that I could list out as the best or a bunch I could list out as the worst. As a matter of fact, I only have 5 on my best list and I only have 2 on my worst list. So I decided to combine the video together and put it out there and tell you what I've really enjoyed and not enjoyed so much about this year. So let's start with the best books of 2022. And like I said, this is the best experiences that I've had in reading in 2022. So the very first one on the list is going to be The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Nobody who's been keeping up with this channel is surprised that Brandon Sanderson is on this list. He's on the list twice. And like I said, I'm not well read enough to say I'm only going to put one of each person or whatever. I'm just telling you the books I had the best time with. And The Way of Kings was one of the best reading experiences I'd had. Now, it took me a while to read it because it's a big book, real big book. I really enjoyed the epicness of it. And I accessed this book through audiobook. And at first, I was a little bit afraid. Like the opening epilogue of this book, plus the beginning of all the chapters, has people using fantasy words. I mean, he made up words for his months and years and so on. And so at the beginning of each chapter, he'll have a quote somebody did, and then he'll say what month and year and whatnot this was quoted in. And it's all a bunch of nonsense words being thrown at me all of a sudden. And reading that, I think it's easier to kind of get what they're doing when you're reading it. When they're throwing it at you on audiobook, it's a little bit like, oh my God, am I going to be able to keep up with this? But I was able to keep up with it. It was fine. Just in the beginning, I was a little bit lost. But it was so epic. The whole book was epic. And it really set up not only a very interesting world, but it set up some really interesting characters, in my opinion, as well. Some of my favorite characters that, what I would list as a favorite character come from this book. I had a great time reading it. It was kind of helped me to get back into fantasy. I loved that about it. So I really had a great time reading this book, and I really recommend this book to anybody who hasn't read Stormlight Archives. You're missing out. If you love epic fantasy, then I definitely recommend this. And it is big, and that's the only thing I would recommend this to most people, but it is a big book. And so if you feel like you couldn't get into that big of a book, then I would recommend Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, which is the second book on my list. 2 Brandon Sanderson books on the list. Sue me. It's what I've been reading. He's who I've been reading, some of who I've been reading. And the Mistborn, The Final Empire, is the first book in a trilogy that is Mistborn Era 1. Brandon Sanderson just finished in November of 2022. He just put out his 4th book in Mistborn Era 2. So he's got 2 eras of this story completed. And each era is kind of jumping to a different part in time with different characters and stuff. So the first one's a trilogy. The second one is 4 books, and I don't know what the next one will be, but it's going to jump to a different place in time, not have the same characters and stuff. So they're kind of standalone series, if you will. And then the Stormlight Archive is a completely different series that he's written. And he's got a bunch of standalone books, and I've been kind of getting into the whole thing. But I've heard a lot of good stuff about Mistborn. I've heard a lot of stuff about the first book, but when I read it, I thought it was excellent. So I would definitely recommend someone pick that up. That is like half the size of The Way of Kings, so it's a smaller read. It's a smaller commitment to reading a single book. And if you want to get into epic fantasy, this is a person to pick up Brandon Sanderson. I recommend these books. The third book that was on my best books of 2022 list was The Green Mile by Stephen King. I love The Green Mile, and it's actually probably my book of the year. It's the only book that I've given 5 stars to. I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting what I got. And I had never read the book before, and I'd never watched the movie before. So I didn't know what to expect. The only thing I knew was it was about a guy who is going to death row, and that he had committed, he had harmed a couple of little girls. That's pretty much most of what I knew about it. And so I didn't watch it, and it was kind of really overhyped, and I didn't watch it for that reason as well. And Stephen King and me at the time were not getting along, so I didn't read it when it first came out. But boy, when I read it this time, I loved it. It was more than I could have expected from it. It was so much better than I thought it was going to be, and I ate it up. It was not the book I was supposed to be reading in November when I did read it. It was kind of the side book, because I was doing a read it or delete it challenge on my Kindle. But I discovered I do still need to have audiobooks for when I'm doing, my chores around the house and stuff. So I picked up The Green Mile, and instead of reading the book that I was supposed to be reading for Read It or Delete It, I was too engrossed in Green Mile. I didn't want to move away. So I loved that book. I loved the fact that the main character wasn't the criminal, which I thought he was when I was barely picking up pieces of it from just, it floating around. But the main character is actually the supervisor of the cell block E, which is the death row, where they do the executions in this prison, and he's the supervisor there. And I really liked his character. I really loved that his character was about, it's my job to help these prisoners out in their last days, and to get them what they need, and to keep them calm, and to keep them happy until we take them to get executed. It's not my job to punish them more. It's not my job to judge them. It's not my job to any of those things. My job is to make them happy and healthy and get them to their execution. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. And so I had a lot of fun with that. The fourth book on my list is also a Stephen King book, and it is Stephen King's It. And for those of you who have been following along, I know this is just me repeating myself, but when I was in high school, I tried to read It, and I DNF'd it halfway through. And I kind of had a negative connotation to Stephen King books since then. And I'm just now starting to really enjoy Stephen King books. I read 3 of them this year, and I really enjoyed what I've read. I've always loved Stephen King movies. I always loved the movie, the 2 movies and the TV adaptation, the miniseries adaptation of It. Loved them. But getting through the book, I was just like, whoa, that's rough. I don't know if I can do that. So I feel like I've kind of broken through. I read Fairy Tale this year, and I broke through that whole Stephen King and me don't get along thing. And so then I was like, okay, now that the wide world of Stephen King is open to me, let's see what else to read. And I decided to pick up It. I was feeling in the mood to get stuck into a big book with lots of characters and stuff. And I really just wanted to, that was my white whale, I keep saying, and I just really wanted to conquer that book. And I'm glad I did. I had a lot of fun reading it. I really enjoyed exploring those characters a little more in depth. I really enjoyed Stephen King just has a way of writing like slice of life stuff. It feels very authentic and very easy to read. He does have a lot of description, and his book is big, but when I was looking at it compared side by side with some of Brandon Sanderson's books, like the Words of Radiance Words of Radiance, which is the second book in the Stormlight Archive series, is longer than it, and I read through that. So I thought, I can do this, and I could do it, and I did do it, and I really enjoyed myself doing it. The last book on this list was a surprise to me some of these books have been a surprise to me that I enjoyed them so much, but for Halloween, for spooky season, for October, I really wanted to read some classic horror, and I chose The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. And I could not tell you how surprised I was that I loved it as much as I did. I didn't just like it. It wasn't just okay. It wasn't like, oh, this is a really enjoyable read. I loved it. And I, again, accessed it through audiobook, and the author did the narration, and he was such a good actor. He really did a great job, particularly playing the demon. There were times when he would chuckle or when he would laugh, or the emphasis he'd put on words and stuff that really brought it to life and made it creepier than reading it would have made it. I was surprised how much I liked it, and I'll probably reread that. I wasn't thinking it would be a reread. I was thinking it would be a enjoyable read. It was something I wanted to read to say I read it, and I'm so glad that I read it. I really loved it. So those were my favorites. Those were the favorites of 2022. My first favorites list, I guess, based off of the year I've read. And I really enjoyed those books. I had a lot of fun reading those books for a variety of reasons. With Exorcist, I enjoyed being able to read them with people. Other people were reading them at the same time. We read it and comment about, oh my God, I'm on chapter this, and this is what's happening, and can you believe that from chapter 5 or whatever. It was really fun, and I really enjoyed that. Some of these books were just enjoyable because it was reintroducing me to fantasy, epic fantasy. So I really had a good time with those books. Moving on to the worst books of 2022, there are only 2 of them on the list that I feel like I had a really bad time with. And there is a book that I DNF'd early on. I don't have that book on this list. That book was Six of Crows by Lady Bardugo, and I did DNF it. But I think that I DNF'd it because it wasn't what I was in the mood for, rather than it was a bad book. And I kind of decided I was going to re-pick it up again at some point and give it a better try. So that book is not on the list. But there are 2 books that I read I really didn't enjoy reading. The first one was called Suffer the Children by John Saul. And John Saul is my favorite horror suspense writer. He has been since me and Stephen King broke up in high school. I mean, when I stopped reading his books, I really wanted to like horror, and I really wanted to read horror, and so I really looked for an author to replace him, and I found John Saul, and I really liked John Saul. Up till now, I have never been disappointed with a book of his that I've read. Some of them are scarier than others. Most of them aren't so much scary as they are creepy. Some of them are just interesting. This one, Suffer the Children, was bad. I gave it a 1 star. I do not recommend this book to anybody. I didn't understand, it didn't seem logical. The curse that was put on the family wasn't logical. The whole premise didn't seem all that logical, and there was nothing, none of the characters were very enjoyable characters. There wasn't really anything to like about them, but they weren't I love to hate them characters either. There wasn't any strong opinions to be had about any of the characters at all. There wasn't really strong opinions to be had about about much of it. The only strong opinion that I have is I strongly disliked it. I strongly disliked reading it. It was a bad premise. Didn't make a lot of sense, and it just wasn't enjoyable. There were so many times when I was just like really just trying to get it over with. That's not what you want when you're reading a book, especially by one of your favorite authors. You don't want to just endure it. You want to enjoy it, and I did not enjoy this book. The second and last book on this list is a controversial one. I feel what I feel, and this is it. I did not like The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And I can't tell you if I did not like The Haunting of Hill House or it's that I did not like Shirley Jackson. I don't know, because I've only read one of her books and this was it. I did not like this book, though. And I've had people tell me, maybe I just didn't get it, or, I didn't dive deep enough into the text to determine its the meaning behind the meaning behind. And I'm just, if I got to search that hard for it, I'm not as interested. I'm not reading because I want to study. I'm reading because I want to escape and enjoy, and I'm doing it for pleasure. I'm not trying. I did college, so I did a lot of reading to study the text then. I'm not as interested in doing that now. But also, I didn't think it was great. And the things that I didn't think was great, some of it was the writing. And maybe this is just a one-off and she doesn't write like this in the other books. And maybe this is indicative of how she writes, but I just didn't like it. Or maybe it's the main character I didn't like. I don't know. Eleanor Vance was the main character in this story. And the story was about her and a couple of other people who have been asked by a psychiatrist or psychologist to come to this haunted house and basically spend the summer with him so he could document whether or not it was actually haunted, and he'd have some witnesses there. And this person was kind of a meek and mild and mousy, has to ask permission to exist kind of person. And she defies her family to go do this thing. And then, I don't know, the scene where she's traveling to the house is meandering and boring and just, in my opinion, not great storytelling. Just spends too much time daydreaming with this character and not enough time advancing any kind of character development or plot or anything. And then when they finally get to the house, the other people that are there are they're not convincing people. They're not likable. They're kind of, I don't know, I didn't think it was very good. And then there was some silly parts in there. Like there was a part where Eleanor looked down and she realized she has red shoes, and she had a whole conversation with herself about, I have red shoes. Having red shoes is a function of being Eleanor. Eleanor has red shoes. I'm just like, oh my God, does Eleanor have, alcohol too? Because she seemed drunk. She seemed out of it. She seemed spacey, and I didn't enjoy it. What's the purpose of noticing that you have red shoes? Did you not notice them when you put them on? And then sitting there and talking about them, and let's see how many ways I can rephrase the sentence, I have red shoes, in my head. I didn't get it. So I know I'm in the minority there. There's a lot of people who really, really love Shirley Jackson and really love this particular story. But it wasn't for me. And I'll give her a shot, Shirley Jackson, again, to read something else of hers. And if I don't like that, then I just won't bother anymore. Not everyone has to like everything. So I just know that when I was reading it, I could not wait to be finished. And it was only 4 hours or so. It was a short story, so it was only like 4 hours long or 6 hours long or somewhere in that vicinity. But I was done with it about 2 hours in, and the other 2 hours I was just kind of just get it over with. I just have to get it over with. I just have to, and who wants to feel like that when they're reading? I don't do this for work. I do this for fun. And I didn't have any fun with that book. So, in my opinion, those were the worst books of 2022. Not the worst books objectively, but my worst reading experiences of 2022 happened during reading those two books. So what did you think about my list? What did you think about my favorites and the ones that I thought that were the worst? Do you have any, or any of my favorites on your favorites too? Or did you happen to read and or dislike any of the two that I disliked? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what your favorite book of the year was and what your least favorite book of the year. I'd be interested to know what you enjoyed, what you didn't. So leave me some comments, and if you liked this, then please give me a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. It's free to do. It really helps out my channel. It lets me know that you want to see more of me and see more content like this. And I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day.